Okay, so my historical figure is Gordon Allport. So, a little bit about his personal life. He was born on November 11th, 1897, in Indiana. Him and his mom and dad, three other brothers, lived here until Alport turned about 6 years old, and then they moved to Ohio. So, like I said, four boys. He was the youngest. Little fun fact, different fact about him is that he was actually born with two missing toes, and there's not really much information on that other than he was born without two of them. But then going into his family life a little bit more, lived with mom and dad, like I said. Mom was very religious, really instilled those religious beliefs into her kids, really wanted them to follow those moral principles that she had set forth for them. And she did a lot of work around the house, supporting dad, who was a doctor. He ran a hospital out of the home, so patients and staff were living in the Allport house quite frequently because he just turned their entire home into a clinic, just because there was not um, a lot of clinics in that area at that time. So he just decided to make his home one. Gordon Alpert grew up helping a lot with that clinic, learning a lot about medicine, and supporting his dad. And then his wife, he did get married. Over here on the side, this picture is an older picture of Gordon Allport and his wife Ada, and they actually met at Harvard. Which I'll touch on here in a bit when we talk about his education. But together they had a child named Robert, and Robert followed in Gordon Allport's dad's footsteps and became a doctor and specialized in pediatrics. And then in 1967, Gordon Allport passed away from lung cancer, just a few months shy of turning 70. So then a little bit about his education, setting him up for his career. Went to high school, graduated in 1950. In high school, he was described as very timid, very shy, but also very in tune with his studies. He really liked to read. He actually also had a printing business in high school, which is really cool to see a high schooler developing their own business, and then was a newspaper editor for his high school as well. So he was involved, but very timid. And then, kind of a flip, became a very outgoing person in his undergrad years at Harvard. He was super involved with foreign exchange students, helping them adjust to American universities. He was part of a lot of clubs. He helped with probation officer duties. He did a lot of volunteer work. Um, and so, again, just very different in his social skills when he went to college. And then in 1919, he graduated from Harvard, with a degree in philosophy and economics. Upon graduation from Harvard, then he took a year off from attending school to teach in Turkey. So went abroad and taught, philosophy and economics, both of those at a university in Turkey. Um, After that year, decided to come back to the States and go to Harvard again to attain a PhD in psychology. This is actually where he met his wife too. She was a clinical psychologist, so she was studying at the same time, and they met through their time at Harvard. But two very important people that Gordon Allport had in his time at Harvard was Herbert Langfield and Hugo Munsterberg. So these two, again, very influential in his studies. Hugo, in particular, studied industrial psychology, known as the father of industrial psychology, and Herbert Langfield really studied personality traits, so that kind of set up the framework for what Gordon also studied. But yeah, very professional or very influential people in his time there. And then upon graduation of his PhD, he became a professor at Harvard and remained there until he passed away in 1969 to lung cancer. So, in going into his work, he was very focused on personality traits, stemming from his influential figure that I touched on. Went on to learn and study personality traits and made his own theory called trait theory. Also wrote a book named Their Personality, a psychological interpretation. Talks all about personality traits, and he defined some of these terms that explained personality traits. So here's the first one: opportunistic functioning. So this was his belief that humans act in a way that helped them survive according to biological needs. So this studied a lot of survival mode things, reaction timing, and what it takes for someone, or what biological needs mean for a person. And second one here, this term was defined as studying the self, and how people function as an individual. So, according to him, the self is defined by experiences and other things that happen in your lifetime. And he believed that there were seven things, seven identifiers that form the self. So getting into, so there's a couple of terms he had defined that sets us up here for this trait theory that he developed. So going into this, there are three categories he put things in. So again, like this picture says up here, thousands of personality traits and grouping them into three categories. So touching on these here, central traits, he believed were forming from habits, which he thought were building blocks for personality. And these are traits that may be used by someone else to describe you. So you can tell by looking at someone, they have blue or green eyes or brown eyes or whatever. So again, just used to describe you. So then moving on to secondary traits, these are traits that you will not learn about someone in a 5-10 minute encounter. So an example of this would be if you may not know that someone is super, super creative just because you've had a short interaction time with them. And the last one here is cardinal traits. So these are something that could define someone's life, and these are not just traits that appear in every single individual. They're individualized. So those are kind of the three categories that he made up for his traits. But going into a little bit of his impact on psychology and trait theory's impact on psychology, both things here, Gordon Allport and his trait theory, are very influential to psychology. The trait theory led to the development of the personality psychology branch, so very important there. And then lots of parts of that trait theory are still practiced today. So obviously, it left a pretty big impact. He became famous through his work with Sigmund Freud and ended up being named 11 out of 100 of the most eminent psychologists. So that's pretty huge too that he was named that. Um, but of course, some criticisms of that trait theory. Many modern theorists believe that an individual can't be categorized into those few categories of personality traits. Felt that there just needed to be more. So that second point here, kind of touching on the same thing, is they felt that they needed to talk more about environmental traits and social factors that tie into personality. And that trait theory just didn't discuss that. So in psychologists today are more focused on the why they fall into the categories that they do. So then came our modern trait theory. So a little bit of a revised theory from Gordon Allport's original, called the five-factor model theory of personality. So many modern psychologists felt that trait theory, with those criticisms and the fact of being a little bit outdated since it did get created in the early-ish 1900s, just need a little revise. So then came five-factor model. And then these, instead of having those three categories, expanded into five, which now they call dimensions, and then addresses some of those things, some of those criticisms of that original theory that I touched on. Talks more about social factors and environmental factors. But that is our modern trait theory and Gordon Allport's trait theory.